Hi, it's Kirby. Today is August the 5th. It's Monday. I hope you guys had a really good weekend. Today, this is a patron-only podcast. So please give this a like. I have friends in a variety of different fields. Among this is the news industry in the mainstream media. I have been having issues with people who are my friends for a long time and who work, let's say, for the New York Times and other newspapers, because I will say something to them, well, in particular to one of my friends, and I find that the response is to gaslight me, and I am clearly offended. So what I want to do today is, I think many of you have heard about Henry Vinson, who co-authored his book, DC Madam. He also used to have a blog. He kind of went, he went to jail, clearly very much like some of the victims of the Franklin child abuse ring. They were sent to jail, as was the photographer. He went to jail. The only people that did not go to jail were the child abusers, right? We have seen the very same thing in the Jeffrey Epstein case. So we have many of these what are believed to be one-off situations. And it's really not just in the United States. We know we have Jimmy Savile in the United Kingdom. We have the stuff that happened in Australia. And although the ones that we read about perhaps sporadically involve the elite. However, this horror, I don't know what else to call it, permeates our society so that it basically, it can happen to any socioeconomic class, and it can happen to any child, no matter how protected. And therefore, it is my belief, and has always been my belief, that the more we know about these things that are very dark, the better able we are to protect ourselves, our family, and our friends. Now, I started off by saying that I have friends in the mainstream media that I have been sort of butting heads with. Now, I don't argue with anyone, as far as I don't have the time to argue with somebody who is still taught to protect their Mockingbird status, because clearly that's what it is. However, I had come across a copy of Henry Vinson's writings at some point. I have the book, and I also have like a copy that I made of some of the things that he used to have on his blog. I don't know that that's still up or not, but basically he wrote something about the Washington Post and their relationship with the CIA. And while he wrote this long before we started to understand that these supposed one-off rings are independent of each other, while my stance is that no, they are the same. They're sanctioned by the same people, and they are all part of one. In fact, my work has taken me into an area where I have also connected, and I'm going to just let you know, give you a heads up, that that's only going to be on my Substack, where I have connected not just these rings, but also serial killers. So serial killers that we have believed were part of no group, right? Were not part, let's say, of the government, or of these rings, the P rings, you can fill in the blank. I see them now as all being part of one thing that is connected to the intelligence agencies, plural. So that what I'm going to try to read through is some of the information that Henry Vinson wrote in 2015 about, I'll start with as much as I can, and then if I don't finish today, I'll do a part 2. So he wrote something about the Washington Post and the CIA, and he called it a love story. And then he starts, I believe unequivocally that some dark corner of the CIA sanctioned Craig Spence's blackmail operation. He told me that he was affiliated with the CIA, and he disclosed to me that CIA operatives had bugged his home for audio-visual blackmail. The Washington Times also found corroboration that Spence was a CIA asset. Spence even told Washington Times reporters that friendly intelligence agents had bugged his home. The Washington Post, however, did everything in its considerable power to paint Spence as delusional and nullify his connections to CIA. He goes on to say, I've had years in and out of prison to ponder Washington Post's cover-up of Spence's crimes. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but rather I'm someone who was placed near the epicenter of sprawling conspiracies by vagaries of fate. In an earlier post, I think I've demonstrated that the Washington Post aided and abetted the government's cover-up of Spence's enterprise. And over the years, I've come across a very interesting relationship between the Washington Post and CIA as I've attempted to understand the conspiracy that engulfed me. Shortly after CIA was formed in 1948, the agency initiated Operation Mockingbird, which was a campaign to influence popular perception through various front organizations and the media. Frank Wisner, head of CIA's Office of Policy Coordination, oversaw Operation Mockingbird. And Wisner boasted that he was the maestro of a mighty Wurlitzer that was capable of playing any propaganda tune he desired. The Mighty Wurlitzer, How CIA Played America, published by Harvard University Press, provides a sweeping overview of Operation Mockingbird. But a second book, Catherine the Great, written by former Village Voice journalist Deborah Davis, is a biographical sketch of Washington Post publisher Catherine Graham, and it focuses specifically on the clandestine connections between CIA and Washington Post. According to Catherine the Great and numerous sources, the CIA's Frank Wisner tapped then Washington Post publisher Philip Graham to be the CIA's Operation Mockingbird point man to infiltrate the media. In Catherine the Great, Davis quoted a former CIA agent who discussed meetings between CIA personnel and Philip Graham, in which they conferred about the availability and prices of journalists. You could get a journalist cheaper than a good call girl for a couple of $100 a month. And then he goes on to say, in parentheses, I've often heard the comparison between journalists and prostitutes, but I think that comparison potentially denigrates the profession of prostitution. Most prostitutes aren't willing to destroy a life to turn a trick, but many journalists will handily destroy a life to land a story, even if the story is about trivial nonsense. He goes on to add, by the early 1950s, Davis wrote in Catherine the Great, Wisner owned respected members of the New York Times, Newsweek, CBS, and other communications vehicles, plus stringers, 400 to 600 in all, according to former CIA analyst. Davis also noted that Philip Graham stocked the Washington Post with writers and editors who had intelligence backgrounds. In addition to spotlighting the relationship between the CIA and Philip Graham, Davis examined the connections between CIA and Ben Bradley, the Washington Post executive editor from 1968 to 1991. Bradley was the executive director of the Post during the newspaper's exposure of Watergate, and also when it covered up Spence's network. Bradley had been portrayed as the Post's salty editor who spurred on the boys, Woodward and Bernstein's quest for truth as they toppled the Nixon administration. But Davis reported on a different side of former Naval Intelligence Officer Ben Bradley. Bradley was a descendant of Boston Blue Bloods, and he landed at the Washington Post as a young reporter in 1948. After 3 years at the Post, Davis reported that Philip Graham pulled a few strings to help Bradley become a press attaché stationed at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. While in France, Bradley developed a number of overt yet interesting ties to CIA. He divorced his first wife and married Antoinette Pinchot, whose sister was married to CIA agent Cord Meyer. Davis asserts Meyer was a principal operative in Operation Mockingbird. Bradley's French wife was also a close friend of CIA's James Jesus Angleton, who at the time was responsible for a collection of foreign intelligence in Europe. Angleton was later chief of the CIA's counterintelligence for more than 20 years. I've personally experienced guilt by association, and I have concluded that it's often an ill-fated formula for speculation. But in the first printing of Catherine the Great, Davis wrote that Bradley produced CIA material when he was a press attaché in Paris. According to Davis, Bradley turned out CIA propaganda regarding the Rosenberg's case as a response to the French newspaper Le Monde, which ran a story declaring that the United States had framed Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, who were the couple accused of imparting A-bomb secrets to the Soviets and sentenced to death. The Le Monde article outraged the CIA chief in Paris because the agency was having difficulties selling the Cold War to a European public who feared that the McCarthy witch hunts were ushering in a new wave of fascism. After Bradley read Catherine the Great, he quickly dispatched a threatening letter to Davis's publisher, Harcourt Brace Janovich, one of the largest book publishers in the world. Bradley's letter made some very unbecoming statements about Davis. Miss Davis is lying. I never produced CIA material. What I can do is to brand Miss Davis a fool and to put your company in that special little group of publishers who don't give a SHIT about the truth. So William Jovanovich, president and CEO of Harcourt Brace, apparently didn't want to be branded in that little group of publishers who don't give an S for the truth by one of the most powerful newspapers in the country. So he ordered 20,000 copies of Catherine the Great to be destroyed, even though the publisher's catalog announced that Catherine the Great would be their top nonfiction selection, and the publisher even nominated the book for an American Book Award. I mean, I think that's really interesting. Excuse me, I don't have any water near me. But anyway, that's not the first time I've heard this happen. That if a book is published by a publisher that feels that they have vetted the information and that it's true, but yet it's revealing something about the other side, in this case, CIA and their connection to, a very important newspaper and people in the Mockingbird media, it's basically telling us that they'll just try to buy up. If they can't sue you, if they can't threaten you, then they will go out and buy the copies of the book up. And I just want to include here that when I was researching for my books on Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, I had to go very deep into Robert Maxwell, who basically did the same thing. He would sue people who basically told the truth. And I think in one case, he went so far as to buying the publishing company. And then he also, the publishing company had a store, and he purchased the bookstore so that he could then not sell the book, whatever he didn't catch, be able to catch it at the bookseller. I myself, with the books that I have on Amazon, which is why I encourage everyone to just get the books from my website, kirbysummers.com, have had a similar experience with these people who want nothing to be said about them that is the truth, right? So they'll go and they'll just leave very bad reviews and destroy my books on Amazon. And I can't call Jeff Bezos and argue with him, because clearly he is one of the members of this group that we are exposing. So what Henry Vinson was talking about when he was grappling with why did the newspapers hide the information about the Franklin child abuse case? Why did they hide the information about Craig Spence? Why did they not print the truth? I mean, he's smart enough to know that we had Operation Mockingbird, which was exposed, again, church committee. But, although I refer to church committee a lot, I also want to underscore the fact that during the church committee hearings, only 10% of the information that was supposed to be covered was covered. And that's because records were destroyed. We know that a lot of almost everything concerning MK Ultra was destroyed. We know that people were murdered before their testimony was supposed to begin. We know that questions were not asked that were supposed to be asked. And there are people who then wrote about the fact that they showed up to be a witness, like former police officers, former members of the FBI. They showed up to give their testimony, and they were either not called, or when they were called, the questions were very brief and they didn't touch upon the information that they thought they were going to be sharing. So that when we reference church committee, I want you to always remember that while we obtained some information from that, it was just a very bare minimum information. Moreover, I know that Frank Church was also, the reason he allowed this to happen is because he too was compromised. And when I say the word compromised, I want you to understand that in the manner that we're talking about it, as it pertains to what Craig Spence was doing, to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, compromised, all right, with minors. Yes, the great Frank Church. There are some good people, but if you're going to be in a position of power, the only way that you get to stay there is to be compromised. I mean, we are now learning that that is the way it is. So anyway, I don't want to bore you with the details, because Henry Vinson basically just goes on to talk about the fact that Phil Graham and, the story was covered up. He does talk a little bit about Carl Bernstein. I will be uploading a podcast here about a conversation I had with Michael Riconosciuto, who had a conversation with let's just call it the son of one of the so-called Watergate investigators, the two, and what that conversation was about. And and I'll just let you know now that as far as what Michael Riconosciuto told me, and I think that I've mentioned who Michael Riconosciuto is before, you could just Google him. He basically told me that although this guy, who is also a journalist for a mainstream media, I mean, who else really gets published these days, right? You're going to have to be part of Mockingbird. That's just the way it is. That even though he bothered him and bothered him and bothered him and chased after him, and he finally agreed to give him a very big story involving Jeffrey Epstein, it was never published. But I will be bringing you that story here on this platform. All right, guys, I love that you guys have been writing down your comments and your thoughts about the information that I share here with you. And if you have any questions about a specific topic that I talk about that perhaps maybe I glossed over, in some cases I do gloss over something because maybe I don't feel comfortable. Even this platform is censored, not as much as YouTube, clearly, but I still have to be careful here. If I can answer it, I'm happy to answer it. If I can't, then I just will say, well, this is as much as I can say here. I hope you guys have a good day. Don't forget to give this a like. All right, bye.